Hello everyone, I'm David Vaucher. Welcome to Return on Racing. Return on Racing is powered by Vaucher Analytics, which helps race teams and drivers drive efficiencies off track so they can fuel success on track. So if you want to discuss your own organization's strategy or finances, drop me a line at contact@vaucheranalytics.com. Return on Racing is also brought to you by the Motorsport Sponsorship Accelerator, the most cutting edge resource out there to learn how to find, maintain, and grow long term sponsorship relationships. If you're interested in finding out more, please visit the Vaucher Analytics website at www.vaucheranalytics.com and use the navigation links at the top right hand of the screen. Okay, so I'm recording this on December 8th, 2025, and it's been just over a week since the WRC season ended in thrilling fashion. But how is the WRC actually doing? Today, I want to cover this topic in the third installment of my State of series, in which I cover the state of various motorsport series at the end of this year. The first episode covered IndyCar, the second one covered endurance racing, via the WEC and IMSA, and I'll link to both of those in the show notes. But for now, let's get to it, the state of the WRC in 2025. At the beginning of the 2025 WRC season, my pick to win it all was Rovanperä. It was a somewhat boring choice, but it seemed to be the consensus one. Rovanperä only raced part-time in 2024 after having won the two previous championships, so clearly he would be the one to beat now that he had asked for a full-time seat again. It says something about how spoiled rally fans were for storylines that not only did Rovanperä not win, but he actually announced his retirement from rallying to pursue a long-term ambition outside the sport, beginning with Super GT in Japan and ultimately, presumably, targeting a path towards Formula One through Toyota, for whom he competed in the WRC and which has just signed a title sponsorship agreement with the Haas F1 team. And if that weren't enough, the title came down to literally fractions of a second on the final stage and was won for the ninth time by Sébastien Ogier, who, despite his prior achievements, seemed like a long shot at the beginning of the season because he himself only intended to participate on a part-time basis. Incredible stuff, really. On top of that, the 2025 season saw 2019 champion Ott Tänak also retire from the sport. Oliver Solberg, son of 2003 WRC champion Petter Solberg, get called up from the WRC 2 division to a Toyota Rally 1 car in the Estonia Rally and win in his debut before eventually claiming the WRC 2 championship later on in the season. You could hardly script more exciting storylines, and yet, in a world where millions of people could probably tell you what Lando Norris ate for breakfast last week, all the drama in the WRC went basically unnoticed by everyone except for rally fans, who, I think is fair to say, are inherently hardcore motorsport fans. That the WRC has reached this point is an indictment not of the sport itself, which has the potential to be one of the most engaging spectator sports on the planet, but rather an indication of a complete lack of imagination relative to its potential. First, let's talk about how the most democratic motorsport in the world is almost totally walled off in 2025. The World Rally Championship should be one of the most culturally relevant motorsport properties on the planet, and in fact, for a time, you could argue it was. During the Group B days of the early to mid 1980s, thousands upon thousands of people flocked to special stages simply because they could. The action was right there. It still is, while being much safer for fans, and yet the crowds just aren't there like they used to be, despite rallying's singular attributes. No other discipline races at the heart of basically every single one of the world's terrain types, from the Kenyan plains to the snowbanks of Sweden to the Saudi Arabian desert. The WRC is not simply on circuits in those countries, but rather in the very heart of their ecosystems. No other sport allows fans to stand within meters of the action and places its drivers in ever changing conditions, to the point where one could argue that the WRC, not F1, is home to the world's greatest. Rallying could truly be for everybody, but you can hardly blame few people for caring because in the WRC, up is down and down is up. F1, the world's most exclusively expensive motorsport, has thousands of on-ramps into fandom, many of which come from F1's own online content, whereas the WRC might as well not exist unless you know it does. F1 probably could get away with scaling back some of its outreach, but instead it just keeps offering on-ramp after on-ramp, and its deal with Apple in the US will only provide more ways of luring people into paying packages. The WRC has none of F1's cultural relevance, and yet it believes it can get away with a few minutes of highlights for every day of rallying, and then a paid service for anyone else wanting to watch full events. This is the core contradiction of rallying in 2025, as it has been for years. On one hand, its very nature is to be in the heart of people's communities. But on the other, the current commercial strategy rests on severely curtailing any access to rallying beyond the communities in which a given rally is taking place. Now, to be fair, the rally format itself has shortcomings which have not been addressed. F1 has grown tremendously because of its packaging as a real world soap opera, with every event presented as a digestible episode. The very format of rallying, with drivers navigating stages individually against the clock, means that full events stretch on for days. Traditional broadcasting simply isn't built for a sport where the action isn't continuous or head to head. Rallying unfolds over many stages across several days, with time gaps that only make sense once you follow the entire sequence. Even committed fans can struggle to follow the entirety of an event as it unfolds, and newcomers have almost no chance, because why would they devote so much time to something with which they are unfamiliar? They might dip in for 20 minutes, see fragmented information, and leave without any sense of who's winning or why it matters. In 2025, there should be technological solutions, or perhaps there are, to overcome this, but it's unclear to me to what extent they are being explored. What is certain to me is that this is not excusable. It's not excusable for the sake of the sport's growth to generate literally minutes of highlights in total for an event. Over a given 4-day rally, including the shakedown, the WRC will produce roughly 20 minutes of highlights, which is as much as F1 creates for a 2-hour race. In 2026 and beyond, building up freely accessible content from the WRC itself, and then later on its teams and drivers, will be foundational for bringing in new fans. Another on-ramp to motorsports is sim racing, and with sim racing growing in popularity, a quality, accessible rallying game is essential for bringing new fans in. It's telling that the most popular title, Richard Burns Rally, is over 20 years old. There have, of course, been many others released since then, and 2025 brought the unlicensed Assetto Corsa Rally, which was welcomed with excellent reviews. However, uncertainty looms over the official licensed title, as EA relinquished the rights back to previous owner Nakon. Some of the questions that come up here are, can the quality of the resulting 2027 title be where it needs to be? What will Nakon do for marketing that the juggernaut EA could not? And will the WRC do as much as it can to not only get it into new players' hands, but also encourage them to follow that up by watching a real rally? Now, there are changes coming, but as I see it, they have the potential to unsettle the sport even more. The 2027 technical regulations reflect an attempt to reset direction, notably by reducing costs and making privateer participation more viable. These are indeed worthy goals, but regulations alone do not create momentum. Fans and manufacturers need to understand what the next era means and why they should care. In other words, the paradigm at the moment feels like the NBA agreeing on the rules of basketball when everyone really wants to play football. This lack of manufacturer and fan appeal at a time when crowds at other motorsport events are at an all-time high is especially baffling when you consider not only how exciting rally is as a sport, but how culturally aligned rallying is with modern consumer identity. While F1 caters to a luxury-focused global audience, the WRC is fundamentally tied to the outdoor, capability-driven demographic that actually buys cars like the ones they see on the special stages. Subaru owners are, whether they realize it or not, demographically and emotionally pre-installed rally fans. And I'll say that's with good reason if you know some rallying history. Toyota and Hyundai sell adventure-oriented products to millions of people. The connection is obvious. Rallying should be a marketer's dream. And yet, instead of building on that foundation, the WRC has allowed its audience to calcify into a hardcore niche. The own goals continue because on top of rallying's sporting appeal and its obvious outdoor connection, rallying may have the best calendar in motorsport, but the most obvious market for rallying is the one missing from the calendar, and that's, of course, the United States. A US event wouldn't just be a rally, it would be a motorsport festival, and rallying definitely needs a festival moment. Can you imagine what a rallying event on the scale of an F1 race would look like? Imagine Burning Man meets Chamonix meets the pages of an outdoor catalog come to life. Indeed, the potential for Rally to be everything that other series say they are is right there. For instance, rallying could be the standard bearer for sustainability, partnering with host locations on various ecotourism initiatives. It could emphasize the fact that the events have no lasting impacts on the environments in which it operates. It could quantify just how much revenue each event generates for the host community itself, rather than a track owner. And let's remember, the rallying is indeed a great equalizer for hosts as well. Because in what other series would a country such as Paraguay have the chance to host a major motorsport event and have it go so well, which is exactly what happened at this year's inaugural rally. Perhaps it's because of all these missed opportunities, the FIA has launched a new tender process for the championship's promotional rights. Rally promoter GmbH, owned by Red Bull and German investment firm KW25, is the current rights holder, but the FIA is now openly soliciting alternatives, with 7 years still left in the existing contract, signaling its dissatisfaction with the series' commercial stagnation. For the FIA to revisit a contract of that scale mid-cycle is a blunt acknowledgement that the WRC is underperforming relative to its potential. In other words, even the governing bodies now recognize what fans have felt for years. Rallying should be much bigger than it is, and the manufacturers still competing at the top level appear to be down to their last couple of seasons of support. On that topic, where are all the manufacturers in rallying? The top level Rally 1 category has only 3 committed manufacturers, and if you look behind the curtain a little bit, you'll realize Toyota is the only big name firmly sticking with the WRC, with M Sport Ford being more of a privateer operation and Hyundai constantly saying it is close to leaving. And I'll just add, perhaps that's true. Their Genesis WEC engine is powered by dual i20 engines from their rally car, so perhaps they developed what they needed and can now move on to a bigger stage. It is tantalizing to imagine what the WRC could be with a full roster of OEMs. Subaru remains, in my opinion, the great white whale, so unmatched is their brand alignment with rallying. Whether Toyota's partial ownership of Subaru is a help or hindrance, and a hypothetical return rather, remains unclear. But the opportunity is enormous for the WRC to make a splash. And maybe that can happen if the recently unveiled Subaru Performance B STI concept is any indication. Understandably, any new manufacturer will likely not want to jump in all at once, so the WRC's most powerful asset may be Rally 2 and the WRC2 division. Indeed, the cars are cheaper, the grids are bigger, and the product is more relatable. Yet the WRC rarely treats WRC2 as a centerpiece, even though it could be the foundation of the sport's next growth phase. It will be crucial in 2026 for the WRC to figure out the role that rallying's second division will play faced with a top-level class whose proposed regulations don't seem to have manufacturers tripping over themselves to follow. And in fact, for 2026, the key question is just figuring out what the WRC overall wants to be. This is what it all comes down to. Today, we know what rallying looks like, physically, the cars, the stages, the environments. But really, those elements only form the outlines of a single event. What does the WRC actually want to represent and stand for? I've written before that a motorsport series is a business model disguised as a rulebook. With that in mind, it follows that for a motorsport series to thrive, it must craft a rulebook and associated marketing case that attract manufacturers first and foremost. And fans must at some point be able to associate those values tightly with the series. For instance, F1 is the pinnacle of engineering, MotoGP is for fearless, almost unbelievable racing, and so on and so forth. If rallying has not ridden the motorsport crest that Drive to Survive started, perhaps a reasonable hypothesis to explain why is that it lacks a simple, clear mission statement. This would need refining, but it could look something like: the WRC aims to be the most relevant and accessible motorsport series in the world. It's simple, but everything is there in the message. The WRC has the potential to make the tightest link there can be between its cars rallying, especially in WRC2, and what consumers can buy from the showroom. Fans and future consumers can see these cars in action simply by pitching a tent or lawn chair near a rally stage. The paradox is that the WRC's greatest weakness is also its greatest opportunity. Because it has underperformed commercially for so long, the market is wide open. There is room for structural reinvention, narrative reframing, and strategic repositioning. In a motorsport landscape dominated by series-chasing artificial glitz, rallying in the WRC is something no other major series has. It feels real because it is real. And at a time when people, especially Gen Z, are apparently craving a return back to authenticity and tactile experiences, that might be the most valuable asset of all. That's the most important conclusion from 2025. The WRC is not failing. It is just underserving its enormous potential. It has the drama, the characters, the landscapes, the heritage, and the natural audience fit. What it lacks is visibility, accessibility, manufacturer depth, and most crucially, a clear narrative around its future. If the WRC and the FIA can address that last imperative, the others will fall into place, and rallying becomes what it always should have been, the motorsport of the people. And that is it for me for another episode of Return on Racing. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, and as always, I want to thank you for taking the time to spend with me. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to hear some insights from an actual rally professional, I'm going to link in the show notes an interview that was actually from the beginning of 2025 that was done with Hayden Paddon. So Hayden Paddon rallies for the Hyundai team. He's been called up to the full-time Rally 1 level, which is fantastic. Congratulations to Hayden Paddon. And when I listened to this interview, I just found it a really insightful, really on-the-ground set of suggestions for how rallying could be made more relevant. And I think that if you enjoyed this particular look at perhaps the high-level strategic side of the WRC, you're really going to enjoy his thoughts as an actual rally driver. So again, I'll link that in the show notes, and I hope that you enjoy it. Thank you again for taking the time to listen to me on Return on Racing, to join me as always, and I really look forward to speaking with you on the next episode of Return on Racing. Thanks so much.